Welcome to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm Bryan.
And I'm Jim Reske.
We're gospel addicts because we believe the gospel of Jesus isn't just good news, it's the best news ever.
We're addicted to the gospel because it doesn't just start us out in the Christian life, it is the Christian life.
Join us as we look at the Bible through the lens of the gospel.
Thanks so much for listening.
On this episode of the Gospel Addict Podcast, we are going to be discussing Deuteronomy chapters 12 through 34. I'm Bryan, and I'm joined with Jim Reske, and Jim and I teach this men's Bible study. Fun thing we do, and it kind of walks through the whole Bible. And so we each, we're a part of a team that rotates. Jim is going to be teaching very soon on Deuteronomy chapters 12 through 34. So Jim, how you feeling about it?
Well, I'm still wrestling with it, Greg. So I'm glad we have a chance to talk through it tonight. So it's great to be with you and fun to talk about this. But it's interesting. I appreciate that explanation because sometimes I think our listeners might say, wait, weren't you just in Matthew or something? And
right. It seems like we jump around a lot, but it's because, we get different teaching assignments. And so we just kind of go with the assignments we have. So the book of Deuteronomy, Jim, people that maybe aren't really familiar, what would you say? How would you describe it?
Well, you can give a very kind of a simple outline of the book. It's Moses giving three sermons. There's an intro and a conclusion, but there's basically three sermons that he gives. And he kind of reiterates the 10 commandments. Then he gives some really detailed commands. Then he talks about blessings and curses. So this is the context of the book is that they've been delivered out of Egypt after 400 years of slavery, the nation of Israel. They were wandered around. They got the 10 commandments at the beginning of that time, after they come out of Egypt. But because of some disobedience, they wandered around the desert for 40 years. And now they've finished that wandering in the desert. They're about to enter the promised land. And Moses is giving the three final sermons of his life. And so he's going to say, I'm going to reiterate for you the 10 commandments. These are the rules. I want you to talk. And there's some real detailed commands on how to live. And then really emphatic kind of sermons about blessings and curses. Blessings if you keep the rules, curses if you don't. And then he appoints Joshua as successor, and he dies at the end of the book. But that's the basic idea of Deuteronomy.
That's great. Well, one of the things we like to do on our podcast is look at the Bible through the lens of the gospel. So what have you discovered as far as how do you see the gospel? How do you see Jesus in the book of Deuteronomy?
Well, there are a couple ways. I would tell you it's not easy. I really wrestled with Deuteronomy. It's not. I think sometimes we as Christians we read the word and we get familiar with it, and we just read it and say, "Oh, that's beautiful," and we get over familiar with it. And if you try to look at it from like the lens of someone from the outside and someone who is looking for the first time, it's a lot of familiar Bible passages are just not easy. Not in Deuteronomy. I'll give you an example. Jesus institutes what we think is the Last Supper: eat my flesh, drink my blood. And you think, oh, that's beautiful. That's what we call it. Greek Christians call that Holy Communion. We do it all the time. If you're a non-believer here for the first time, you say, what? He said, drink my blood? What? So stuff that you think is easy and obvious, you try to look at it and you say, wow, the Bible says that? What does that mean? And I think Deuteronomy is actually filled with that. But I did see the gospel coming through in a couple of ways to kind of get to what you were saying. You mentioned
you mentioned a passage in chapter 32. Maybe we could just start there, even though
sure. That's great. Let's start there, because I do think one of the things we try to do is like read the Bible through that lens of the gospel and see what it says. So chapter 32 probably be my favorite verse in the whole book. Not the most famous verse in the whole book. The most famous and oft quoted is what's called the Shema in chapter 6. Jesus quotes it. You shall love the Lord your God with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your might. And then Jesus adds with all your mind as well. That's probably the most famous verse in Deuteronomy. People probably quote that. It's a beautiful verse, and it's probably favorites for a reason. But what I liked is a kind of obscure verse towards the end, because Moses has kind of given this law to people, and he's given detailed commands. He said, I'm setting before you a choice: blessings and curses. Blessings if you follow the law, curses if you don't. Make the right decision. He says, you can do it. You can do it. And then towards the end, there's a kind of a chilling passage where God comes to Moses and says, these people aren't going to do it. I know they're not going to do it. And Moses writes that down. It's in the book, it's like that. You're not going to do it. I know right now. I have perfect foreknowledge of where you're going to go. And it's pretty blistering. God says, you're going to prostitute yourself to foreign idols, and I'm going to forsake you because of your disobedience. And you're going to wonder why this all happened. And it's because of your disobedience. And so it's an awful prediction. So they have the choice, right? Make this choice. Lots of detailed laws, blessings if you keep them, curses if you don't. You can do it. So but it's like an anti-pep talk, because then God shows up and says, you're not going to do this. And then towards the end, Moses teaches them a song. He says, now I want you to sing this song. And you think, okay, it's going to be an uplifting song. It's going to really now this song is going to inspire them to make the right choice and get the blessings and not the curses. And the song is like a dirge. I mean, we don't know what the musical accompaniment was, but the song is relentlessly reminding them of what sinners they are, and that they're going to make the wrong choices. And right at the beginning of the song, this illustrates the gospel you and I always talk about, Greg. So our understanding of what does it mean to have gospel-driven sanctification, where the gospel is propelling your Christian life all the way forward. It means that you're growing in your awareness of God's holiness over time. Two things, right? Over time, awareness of his holiness, and at the same time, awareness for your own sin. And Martin Luther famously said, although I can't find the exact place he said it, but famously Martin Luther said, whenever you read the Bible, you look for those two things. Look for one of those things in every passage of the Bible. So something in the Bible is telling you about God's character, his holiness, or your lostness, your sin. And Luther did that for a reason, because as you see that, you're going to see the gap bigger and bigger than you thought. You're going to get more in touch with spirituality than you thought, because that gap is huge, and you'll see Jesus filling that gap for you. And that's why I see in chapter 32 in that song, as Moses starts the song, he get to 32, chapter 32, verses 4 and 5. Do you have it? Can you read it?
Yeah, I do. To 32, chapter 32, verses 4 and 5. The rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice, a God of faithfulness and without iniquity, just and upright is he.
Yeah, stop there. That's verse 4. And there you have it. He's saying, I want you to sing this all the time. Remind yourself of God's perfect, beautiful, perfect holiness, right?
Yeah.
And then what? Next verse.
The greatness of God. And then verse 5, they have dealt corruptly with him. They are no longer his children, because they are blemished. They're a crooked and twisted generation.
That's Moses saying, look, I want you to sing this song, okay? I want you to sing this song so that you really get in your heart everything I'm teaching you today. And its song is full of self-indictments like this, but that's the other thing that Luther said you're supposed to look for, right there. You're corrupt and not his children. To your shame, you are a warped and crooked generation. And look, when you and I talk about the gospel, we talk about the 5 words that all begin with the letter S that describe the gospel. And this is the concept of scale. We did a podcast on this, but scale, right? The vastness of the distance. And Moses is, the whole first part of the book is, here's the choice, make better choices. There's part where he says, it's not too difficult. You actually could do this, but I know you won't. Actually, then God's the one who shows up and says, they're not going to do it. I know they're not going to do it. And then launching a song. I want you to sing the song. Remember this. And the song is, look, there's a vast difference between his holiness and yours. It's the gospel coming through. Something's got to fill that gap for you, right? Something's got to fill that gap for you. And there's a hint there, the becoming Messiah. We talks about, there's a couple verses. There's lots of beautiful verses in Deuteronomy where he talks about what you really need is a circumcision of the heart. You need a circumcision of the heart. And it's like, well, what does that say? Metaphorical, because they had the practice of circumcision instituted, but what do you mean a circumcision of the heart? And the prophets later pick up on that. Jeremiah picks up on that. And Paul talks about that in 2 places, in Romans 2 and in Colossians 2, circumcision of the heart. You've got to, what you need is a change from the inside out. So, and obviously, and you're looking forward to the one who's going to close that gap for you, the Messiah. But it still does, it leaves a lot of conundrum of how do you read the book of Deuteronomy, because it really does set up all these rules and regulations, and with this pretty relentless pitch to the reader that says, here, you make better choices. make good choices. And if you choose well, you get blessings. And if you choose poorly, you get curses. And if you're a Christian reading today, you say, well, so what does that mean? Am I supposed to do all these things? Am I supposed to keep all these commands? Am I supposed to follow all these rules? How do I read this as a Christian today? So that was,
Yeah, man, that's great. Back to the scale thing, you made
mhm.
me realize that some of the old hymns do a really good job. Almost every really classic old hymn talks about the holiness and the greatness of God on the one hand, but then also the depth of our sinfulness on the other hand.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of any in particular.
Well, like holy, holy, holy,
Yeah.
you know, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. Early in the morning, our song shall rise to thee. But then another verse says, though the eye of sinful man thy glory may not see,
Yeah.
you
Right. There
know,
it is.
right. And I'm thinking that almost every old hymn always has verses on the greatness of God, the holiness of God, but then also the depth of man's sin.
Oh, look, Amazing Grace is probably one of the better. Like, the saved a wretch like me, right? I was lost and now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see.
Yeah.
You know,
So did you mentioned the five S's of the gospel? Did you see any other the S's
yeah.
in Deuteronomy?
Two others in particular. One is there's the substitution. So it kind of gets to what leads. It's a natural next step of what we were just talking about, the sense of scale. And you say there's a vast gulf, something's got to fill that gulf. There's a part in the middle of the book where there's this ceremony. Um, they're crossing over into the promised land. They're about to. Okay, and Moses is not going to cross because he committed a sin, and God said, "You're not. You can see it, but you're not going over there." But he says, "What I want you to do is have this ceremony." It's right in the middle of the book, and he said, "What are we going to do? Is go to the mountain." And he said, "I want you to go to a certain place, and it's by the Oaks of Moran." And it's significant because the Oaks of Moran are not just some random place; they are the very place where Abraham, when he was first called by God from the land of Ur to go to the promised land and start the whole nation of Israel, as he was about to cross into the promised land, he sacrificed and built an altar to God at the Oaks of Moran, the very same spot. So
Huh.
now they have wandered the desert 40 years. They've come up north from like the Sinai Peninsula. They're about to cross over, going from west to east, about the same exact spot that Abraham had entered in. And when Abraham entered in, he built an altar to the Lord. And what Moses says here is, what I want you to do is go there. There's two mountains. One is called Ebal, and one is Gerizim. And he said, I want you to build an altar on Mount Ebal. And I want you to gather people together. We're going to rejoice, have a big party, and but we're going to have to offer sacrifices there. And then I'm going to take the 12 tribes of Israel and divide them between the two mountains. So 6 tribes on one mountain, 6 tribes on the other mountain. And then they're going to listen to a sermon from the Levites. And the Levites are going to give, it's like a curse summary. It's a summary of the entire book of Deuteronomy. I think it's chapter 27. It's a summary of the whole book in like 10 curses. So it's not blessings and curses, it's like just 10 curses. And you listen to these curses and they just kind of summarize the whole book. And see if I can find it. Because like the first two, like this one is like they have no other idols, and then honor your father and mother. Um, and then the third one deals with property rights in the land. They're entering a little bit that going like thou shalt not steal, like honoring property rights. Then there's fourth and fifth ones deal with taking care of the poor and powerless in the land, like blind people in the land they're going to conquer. They said you cannot pervert justice due to the immigrant, the fatherless, or the widow. So there's a lot of, it's like the social justice, what we might today call social justice. And then there's 4 rules, 6, 7, 8, 9 on sexual purity. Cursed if you do this, cursed if you do that. And then the last one's like a blanket catch-all. So cursed is anyone who doesn't keep a law. So it's like in one little passage, it's chapter 27. So one little section, the Levites are going to give this curse summary, a summary of the law expressed in the form of curses. Cursed if you don't do these things, both in terms of sexual purity, individual purity, but also like socially taking care of the poor and the powerless, getting rid of idol worship, honoring your father and mother, family structure, all this stuff in one little summary. But in the whole thing, you need an altar. You need an
Mm.
altar. And the altar is not built on the good mountain because, the one mountain is where the tribes go that represent the blessings and the tribes represent curses. The altar is on the cursed mountain, on Ebal. And the point of it is to say, I'm telling you what you should do. I'm telling you all these laws and with curses if you don't do it, but you're not going to. You are going to need a substitute.
Wow.
You are not going to do it. And
That's
I'm
powerful.
as I'm telling you this, as I'm telling you this right now, I know the get it's theoretically possible that you could keep the whole law, but you're not. You absolutely need a substitute at the institution of it, at the ceremony, the curse ceremony. Build an altar right now and start offering sacrifices because you need an atoning blood sacrifice for your sin because the gap's too big for you. You can't fill it up yourself.
That is fantastic. That is amazing.
Yeah,
That
and
is
it changes your
cool.
whole reading of it too, Greg, because it's like you look at it and say, "Oh, so he's given all these laws so that people can build their own bridge to God, right? That's what every religion does, right?
That's what a lot of people read the Old Testament. That's what they think. The Old Testament is all about like following the rules. You
Right.
gotta do, and then Jesus comes along and but you know what? Yeah, this is so powerful. You keep
Yeah.
going.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah. People think, yeah, that was the Old Testament. It's like the whole thinking changed. Like, no, no. And then you look at verses in Hebrews that help you understand it. The Bible, the best way to interpret scriptures of scripture does you say, it was impossible for the blood of goats and rams to take away sins. It was all foreshadowing looking forward to the Messiah. So even in the Old Testament, what they were saved by was the blood of the Messiah. They're just looking forward to it. Right. Um, but get to all these rules and say, as a Christian, so what am I supposed to do with all this stuff? Just read it, ignore it. So, for example, there's all these rules on sexual purity. Do you say that doesn't apply anymore? I don't have to do that. And I think, by the way, I think there's some people who do read the Bible that way. They say, look at this. They say, you can't expect me something written on some scroll 3,500 years ago to be binding to the way I live my life today. It's ridiculous, right? But Christians, throughout the whole history of the church, Christians have said, yeah, those laws are very much binding. It was a noteworthy aspect of the Christian church, this sexual purity, right there. That phrase, how's it go? It was like actually written by some other historian, not a secular historian, said these Christians they share their money with everyone and their bed with no one.
Huh.
Have you heard that before?
I have heard that, but I can't remember the source either.
Yeah, but because it was like the comment was it's exactly the opposite of all of us. We share our money with no one. We share our bed with everybody, right? And these Christians are the exact opposite. And so sexual purity has always been a hallmark of it. So we feel like, yeah, those rules are there, but then there's all kinds of other rules that make you scratch your head. So and wonder like one of my favorites. There's a rule here. I guess I should say favorite, but there's rules like that say if you have an unruly child, it's in chapter 22, I think. If you have an unruly child and that child does not listen to you, then you must bring him to the town council, and then the town council must stone that child to death.
That is so crazy.
Yeah, well, it's in the Bible,
Right.
and is it chapter 22? Yeah, I think it is chapter 22. 22 verses 18 to 21. Suppose a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey his father and mother, even though they discipline him. In such a case, the father and mother must take the son to the elders as they hold court at the town gate. The parents must say to the elders, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious and refuses to obey. He is a glutton and a drunkard. And you think with modern sensibilities to say, well, they give him some parental advice, send him home, talk about positive reinforcement. Verse 21, then all the men of this town must stone him to death. In this way, you will purge this evil from among you, and all Israel will hear about it and be afraid. Now, maybe that never happened. It was just the ultimate hammer you could use to discipline your adolescent children to say, by the way, what Moses said, right? The threat of it alone might have been enough, right? But like, if it's a non-Christian, you read that and you say, what? Do you believe that? Is that what you believe? And I think that's part of the problem. We as Christians, we say these rules on sexual purity are eternal, they're binding. And I think other people look at that and they say, oh, you want to take those rules and apply them to me and tell me those are eternal. What about this? Do you believe in verse Deuteronomy 22, verse 21. Stone your children. Is that what you believe?
Hmm.
No. Oh, so the verse you want to apply to me is eternal and binding. Yeah, that's right. But this verse on stoning the children, that no longer applies. Yeah, that's right. That no longer applies. So, okay.
Yeah. So what do you make of that?
So part of it, part of it, I think there's part of it is our understanding through the New Testament, through Hebrews, and then through what the Christians have always believed, right? So part of it is there's a whole bunch of dietary laws. So one of the obvious things to say this, they says there's lots of dietary laws and birds of the air that you can and can't eat pork, for example. And there's New Testament passages where we talk about some of the Old Testament laws are really, were symbolic for a time and not binding forever in the New Testament, New Covenant. But so that's part of it, at least with dietary laws. But some of the other stuff, you go, wow, what is if you don't think it's binding, why is God giving you these laws? What's the point? And that's where I struggle with, Greg. That's where I like looking like, oh, it's not, Deuteronomy, I'll teach you in Deuteronomy. It's not an easy read. It's not a simple, easy read to go through it. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Gospel Addict Podcast. Feel free to contact us via email at gospeladdictpodcast@gmail.com.
Stay tuned for our next episode, and remember, on your worst days, you're never beyond the reach of God's grace, and on your best days, you're never beyond the need of God's grace.
See you next time.